Steve as the person who asks respectable questions. Would you like to ask Ron a respectable leading question? Because if not, I'm just going to have to talk to Ron about Sonrisa Salvaje, which he didn't play on.
No,
define respectable.
Well, I guess we can start get right into it because, well, first off, looking at your discography, you have played with a ton of people that are in my record collection, and including folks that I think more people should know about, like The Storm and Dave Meniketti, and oh my goodness, David Glenn Isley's another one. So I mean, let alone David Lee Roth, which we'll get into in a second. But I mean, how basically did you? I mean, you kind of, I mean, both live and in the studio, and Cher as well. I mean, how did you kind of evolve into being what's essentially an incredibly successful working musician?
Well, I'm lucky, first of all. And I worked, I obviously worked hard. If you get the opportunity, that's one thing. You have to have, some level of, know somebody or get, have the chance to get the opportunity. But once you get it, you have to be able to, do the job, right? So I worked hard to be able to play those gigs, but each one of those is actually a little bit different story. So let's see, with Dave Isley, I've known Dave since I'm gonna say like 86 or something like that, 85, somewhere in there.
Jafria.
Yeah, he actually he wanted me to join Jafria. I met him. We were playing. We set this softball game out in Studio City, and a whole bunch of musicians played in that game, like every Sunday morning. Ricky Phillips, Pat Torpey, Dave. Dave was a minor league baseball player. I don't know if you knew that. Dave Isley.
I've heard that before, and I think we previously had a guest who also played in that softball league.
Jesse Harms.
Jesse Harms.
Jesse Harms. I did Jesse's solo album too.
Really?
This is amazing.
It's called The Best of What I've Got. It's actually one of the favorite things I've done. I love his writing. So I've known Jesse used to share a house with Ricky Phillips in North Hollywood. I used to go over there and record in their living room. But anyway, yeah, Jesse was part of that, and just a ton of guys. Dave Amato, Chuck Wright, all kinds of people were in that game. And so I auditioned for Jafria, and Dave actually wanted me to join the band, but I think Greg Jafria didn't. He wanted somebody else. I don't remember who they hired, but and then it didn't really go anywhere anyway. But after that, Dave started doing some other stuff, and he kept asking me to play on all of it. So I did 3 songs with him and Craig Goldie that wound up being on Craig's solo record, which the name of which escapes me at the moment. But there was 3 songs that we did like in the late 80s that he eventually put on that record. I think it was sometime in the early 90s. And then down the road, every time Dave had some solo thing, I wound up doing it. I just did 2 records with him in the last couple of years. One with him and Craig, and one that's just a Dave solo record. And I did another one back in the early 2000s. He's still a good pal of mine. Dave grew up with the Porcaro brothers and Steve Lukather. They all went to high school together. And Dave, Jeff Porcaro is like a big hero to a lot of drummers, including me.
Yeah.
And he compares me to Jeff, which I find astonishing because, I would never put myself in that category, but Dave is so kind and always so complimentary of my playing. And he's just always called me. He just likes my playing for whatever reason. So that was the story of getting with Dave, and I'm still in touch with him. I still talk to him now and then. And then let's see, what did you ask about The Storm? The Storm was, I was in Cher's band. Well, okay, I'll start with that. In Cher's band, that was just a cattle call audition. I got a call one day from a friend of mine who said, hey, they're auditioning people for Cher, and this was in 1989. And I, was able to get an audition, and I think there was like 100 people literally on every instrument they were auditioning. So you went to this audition, and they took a picture of you and said, okay, we'll call you or whatever. And I wound up getting called. It took 6 auditions to get that gig. that you kept having to go back, and they
Whoa.
kept whittling it down, you know, like, and the last two she was at, but she wasn't at any of the preliminary ones. She had a musical director and her staff or whatever going through everybody. And so then I wound up doing that gig. And then I was in the band, and then I was recommended to the Storm by actually 4 different people, which was amazing. Pat Torpy was one of them. He's the drummer from Mr. Big. And he was part of that softball thing, you know, and I became pretty friendly with Pat. And he was managed, Mr. Big was managed by Herbie Herbert, which is Journey's manager, right? And he was one of the managers of the Storm at the time. And so he recommended me, and then I had become friendly with Mickey Curry from Bryan Adams' band, and he heard that the Storm was going to be opening for Bryan Adams in '92, and so he recommended me. And then I also had a recommendation from Steve Smith, who was leaving the band. So I don't know if that was good or not, because I think they were kind of mad at him at the time. And then I think it was Dean Casanova might have been the other one. Anyway, that was another one.
Wait a second. Steve Smith and Dean Casanova in the same sentence, even though they're both Journey guys. You just mentioned Herbie Herbert, and that's a Journey guy. So yeah. Journey is spinning into this as well.
Greg Raleigh and Ross Valerie were in that band.
And you played with Greg in the Greg Raleigh band.
Oh, for years. Greg and I have been close friends since I joined the Storm.
Okay.
When I joined the Storm, or when I auditioned for the Storm, is when I met Greg, you know, and we hit it off right away. We became really good friends. And once I joined the band, I stayed at his house for, I don't know, several weeks or months while we rehearsed and got ready to tour. And every time I went up there, like when we recorded the Eye of the Storm album, I'd stay at his house. And then when we did Greg's first solo record, which was 2000, well, we started it in 1999. It was ultimately released in 2001, I think. But that by then he had moved from the Bay Area down to San Diego. And so he told me he didn't have any excuse to not come and work with me in my studio after that. So he would come up to my house, and we recorded most of that. He did a lot of his vocals and stuff at his house, but all the drum tracks and guitars and stuff like that we did in my studio. And then we started the band, and we did the band till just recently, like a year ago or whatever. We stopped doing that. And I've done, besides the Eye of the Storm record with him, I've done 3 other records with him, which was Roots. Then there's a live record called Rain Dance, which I, not trying to pat myself on the back, but I recommend if you like that Santana stuff. And then a recent record that he did called Sonic Ranch, which Steve Lukather is on a couple of cuts, and Neil's on a couple of cuts, and Alfonso Johnson. Alfonso's on both of the other Greg records as well. Anyway, so yeah. So what were the other ones you asked me about? There was
Dave Menichetti, YNT. It's a lengthy list, and we should say to see everyone you've played with, and who, if you're listening to this, you likely probably have a good number of these albums and artists in your record collection. Go to ronwikso.com to check it all out and everything you got going on.
Probably got to spell that, because nobody knows how to spell my last name.
Wikso. There you go.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Alfonso Johnson. He factored into Jesse Harms getting his big break as well. So
right.
We're learning softball Jesse Harms' journey. Still, the cyclone is going around.
Alfonso, I have to tell you, Alfonso, what an amazing musician that guy is, and a humble guy. He was playing in Weather Report before Jocko in the mid-'70s, and I remember the first time I did a session with him was in the early 80s or mid-'80s, and I just was blown away. And then when I got in the band with him, I was just like, how am I playing with this guy? He's just, I did the same thing with Greg. One time I was in the car with Greg coming back from rehearsal with the Storm, and one of, I don't know, it was Black Magic Woman or Evil Ways, one of those came on, and, he was the lead singer in that band. So that's him singing. And I just looked at him and I said, "That's you, isn't it?" And he's just, "Oh yeah," But yeah. And then the Dave Menichetti thing, just to cap that off, that was because our other manager in the Storm was a guy named Scott Bourret. and Scott was Y&T's manager for many years.
Yeah.
And he's currently Steve Miller's manager. And so when Dave was getting ready to do a solo record, Scott was the one who referred me, and I went up and stayed at Dave's house. We did the whole thing at his house. And actually, I just saw Dave almost a year ago now. He played in Austin, and I went down to see his gig. And
right on.
he's a super nice guy. Him and his wife, Jill, are super nice people.
Yeah, I've always heard that. I'm a huge Y&T fan. I have the On the Blue Side album. I think that was his first solo record. So
that's the one I played on. Yeah.
Yeah, just fantastic playing, and love that album and love them. So love your playing too. So
thanks.
So speaking of playing, of course, you're on the DLR Cast, and one thing of course you played with Diamond Dave himself. One thing I forgot about was the fact that you didn't play on Your Filthy Little Mouth record, but you did the entire tour.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So sorry.
No, go ahead. What was the question?
I was going to say, so I mean, just, tell us how that came about, because I kind of forgot that. And I know there was a lot of different people that played on that record. And looking back, I think hindsight's always 20/20, especially musically, but knowing what I've seen live of those shows, I wish you played on that record.
Well, thanks. There is actually some recordings. There's a 2 CD limited edition set that I'm on that came out of that band. But anyway, the way that I got in that band was Greg Bissonette referred me to that, actually. And so I've known Greg also since the early or mid 80s, I guess. We were both knocking around in LA. And I'm really good friends with Matt, his brother, as well, who currently plays bass with Elton John. Well, if there's ever any more touring in the world.
Right.
But Matt and I still do a lot of stuff, remote tracks together. I hire him for different things that, if somebody asks me to get other musicians, I hire Matt, and he's on a bunch of recordings that I've done with, my girlfriend and I have a project that I'll tell you about in a little bit, but he's on that stuff. And anyway, so Greg referred me to that. And at the time, when I first got the call, I was on the road with a blues thing just for like a week tour it was like between Christmas and New Year's, just over New Year's, with a guy named Mike Finnegan, who's a legendary singer and blues B3 player. He's played with Jimi Hendrix and he was he's played with Bonnie Raitt for many years, and Joe Cocker, and just a million people. And anyway, so I got the call, and so I went and auditioned. It was like, I don't know, the week after I got back from that. And so this was like the first week of January of '94. And at that time, the Storm still existed, but we really weren't doing much because we made that record, and Interscope kind of, turned into a rap and grunge label, and they really weren't doing anything for us. But we still had some gigs on the books. So anyway, my audition with Dave was at his house in Pasadena, which is the same house where Van Halen rehearsed and got, did all that stuff. And I was down there in the basement with the guitar player and the bass player, which was Terry Kilgore at that time and Jamie Hunting. And so we just went through these songs that they had asked me to learn. And unbeknownst to me, Dave was upstairs listening. He didn't show himself. Yeah. So, and then, he came down after, whatever it was, a half hour or an hour or whatever it was. And, said, hey, you want the gig? And so that was how I joined his band. And then, so for the first 3 weeks of that gig, I had gigs with the Storm. They were all up in the Bay Area. So the gigs were at night, but I had Dave rehearsals during the day in Pasadena at his house. So what I would do was I'd finish the Dave rehearsal, and then I'd drive to Burbank Airport, catch a Southwest flight up to Oakland, and Ross or somebody would pick me up, and then we'd go do the gig with the Storm. Then the next morning, Greg would drive me back to the airport, and I'd fly back down for Dave's rehearsal. And I did that for 2 weeks. It was
brutal.
And my hands were killing me because that's a lot of playing. And then plus the traveling and everything, I was just dying. But anyway, got through it. And then, so the record I was going to tell you about with Dave, one of the first things we did was this show at Capitol Studios in Hollywood, and it was I forget what it was, like for Westwood One or something like that. And there was actually an audience, this very small audience. So, you could only fit like whatever it was, 40 or 50 people on folding chairs in the studio there. But they recorded that, and it became a double album or a double CD, like limited edition. There's only like, I think 5 songs on each CD or something like that. And so it's out there. I think it's called Nightlife or something like that. Anyway, I didn't actually know they were making, huh?
I've never heard of this. Have you heard of this before, Steve? Nightlife?
I have not. The only other songs
I have it.
Wow.
I'll tell you the story of how I got it too. It's pretty funny. So we're in England, right? So we had done a short tour, like a promo tour in the States, and then we went to Japan, and then we went to England. And one of the first gigs in England was, the whole tour was Jason Bonham's band. I think it was called Motherload or something like that at the time. They were opening for us, and I was really, interested in meeting Jason because I was a huge fan of his father's and all that. So the first gig at soundcheck, when they were soundchecking, I went out into the house to listen to him. And when I went out there were all these flyers on the seats for this new David Lee Roth limited edition CD. And it said live versions of, some of the songs from the Your Filthy Little Mouth, record, but they were live versions. And I thought, how could there be live versions? We're the only band that's played it live, so Big Train was on it and Experience, I think. And then there was a couple of Van Halen cuts, Panama and Jump or whatever, whatever's on there. And so I was like, wow, I wonder what's the deal with this. So I asked the manager about it. I mean, not just me, the other guys in the band. And they were like, oh yeah, it's just this like little promo thing. It's no big deal, The big deal to us was that they hadn't paid us for it. Oh. And so the guy, his manager told me, he goes, oh, it's not even for sale in the stores or anything. It's just like this little promo thing we're doing. I was like, oh, okay. So the next day I went down to Tower Records in Piccadilly Circus and I bought it. And I said, I thought it wasn't for sale. I still never got paid for it. Anyway, the record does exist. I even have a copy of it somewhere, although it's in a box. I'd show it to you, but I don't have it like handy right now.
There is some research to be done. So I cut you off there because I never heard of that. You just broke a story, Ron, that it's probably going to wind up on the Van Halen news desk before you know it. But we took you off task. So you got the gig, U.S. promo thing, then you went to Japan. So it was like 18 months or so on and off.
Oh, it wasn't that long. It was, I was only in the band from January of that year till I think October of the same year, because then I joined Foreigner in January of '95.
That was basically the entire Your Filthy Little Mouth tour, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I did the whole tour, yeah.
For the whole cycle, I guess, so.
Yeah. After that, I think he did his Vegas thing like a year or two after that.
Yes. The first time around.
The
Mambo Slammers.
Probably be thankful you were not doing that.
Yeah, I never saw it, so I don't know. Dave is an interesting guy. I had an amazing experience playing all that music. The guys in the band were great, and Dave could be great too. But I think he was going through some stuff at the time too. It was like it wasn't the same as like the Yankee Rose and all that stuff. We were playing smaller venues, and I think there was some record company issues. So I think he was a little stressed out, but.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, what the mood and the vibe was like, because the shows that I've seen online, it looked like you guys were it just looked fantastic, and everyone's, of course, consummate pros. But at that time, it was smaller venues, it was clubs. Unfortunately, that album, died a pretty quick death sales-wise, at least in the States. Yeah. And it had to, you're at one level just a few years before, and then
that's what I mean.
It's this level.
That's why I think he was a little bit stressed out at the time. I'm not privy to all of the, business or, things that were going on with him behind the scenes, but, it wasn't the same. Brett Tuggle was on that tour, so he knew the difference between, what we were doing then and what they had done on the Yankee Rose and all that stuff, just like Paradise Tours or whatever those were called. And I'm pretty sure he told me that back then Dave had his own bus, and it was a much bigger scale than what we did. And Dave was on the same bus with us at that, in our tour.
Wow.
And and like I say, a lot of it was great. He could be great, and then he could be like, you had to be sort of like a little careful, like you didn't get him mad or whatever, but look, I don't mean to sound like I'm complaining or anything, because I had a great time with the band. Everybody in the band was fantastic, and playing those songs. I mean, they're classic songs. Even the stuff that was on the Filthy Little Mouth record, I enjoyed a lot of that stuff too. They weren't as big a hits necessarily, obviously, as Plain Jump or whatever, but still, the hardcore Van Halen and David Lee Roth fans, they loved it. I mean, it didn't matter if we were playing to 500 people or 10,000 people. We did do some bigger venues too, some like fairgrounds and festivals and stuff like that, and theaters, and so it wasn't all clubs or anything. And even the clubs they were bigger. There's always a few thousand people at the gigs, generally speaking. But it was definitely, not the big Dave thing that you're used to seeing on the big giant stage with all that stuff. But musically, it was fantastic.
Something that on the musical end, something that intrigues me about that era of David Lee Roth is stylistically, your Filthy Little Mouth is all over the place. He goes into blues territory and all that. Then the Vegas residency, a year or two after that, there's no guitars. It's a big band, no guitars.
Yeah.
The next album we get, the DLR band album, it's some retreading of Hot for Teacher with Slam Dunk and that kind of stuff. So when you're joining Dave's band, are they telling you, hey, you have to play exactly like Alex, or did you have free reign?
No, they didn't say that, but my approach to or any kind of a gig that I'm doing, Foreigner or whoever it is to be true to the music, and to, if there's something in the music that you would miss if it wasn't played, then you have to play that. That's how I think of it, So there's certain parts that, you just have to play it like the record or as close to it as you can, depending on what it is. And the rest of it, as long as it has, the right feel and is recognizable, then you can have a little bit of license with it. But, like there are certain drum fills that, if you didn't play that drum fill, it just wouldn't make sense, right?
Right. They're just iconic to the song.
Exactly. Yeah. And the same is true for guitar or whatever else, so you got to play certain things or it's no longer that song. Right. So that's just the way I approached it, and kind of the way I approach anything if I'm stepping into a situation where I'm playing well-known songs,
Did you have to learn every single Roth and Van Halen song to do it, or is it like, here's the 20 we're doing on this tour, there you go?
It was that. It was here's what we're going to do, and there was extras, I think I don't remember all of them, and then there was a few times when we would learn a song, like I remember one time we learned Dance the Night Away or something at soundcheck, and we played it, started playing it after that, but we hadn't done it for, the first several months of the tour, and then he decided he wanted to do it. So there's always something like that, where you just do something new to change it up a little bit,
And do you remember how to play all those songs now? And then I just cut off Steve there. But
that's all right.
Are you the kind of drummer who memorizes everything, or do you have to chart out everything and then refer back to the charts?
Well, my approach to learning songs, I guess, is a little bit different than some people. Like, I guess it depends on how you learned how to play. And in my case, I learned, how to read music and stuff. Greg Bissonette is the same way. There's a lot of guys. Kenny Aronoff, I know, does this too. And what I do is I listen to the song and I make myself a chart. but it's not like a note for note chart. It's basically like the form of the song and anything that I think is probably important in the song, like so specific, you know, punches or hits or drum fills or whatever. Excuse me. So I write all that stuff out. And for me, usually, you know, it's easier for less complex songs, but the whole act of writing it out is kind of almost like taking a picture of it for me in my head. So like I write it all out. It doesn't mean I know it cold once I've written it out, but it gives me a good starting point. And then, so usually once I've written it out, then I'll try to practice it a bunch of times, you know, and kind of get to know it and try to get it under my hands and feet and everything. And then after you've done it for a little while, then you kind of have to sort of force yourself to not have the chart anymore so that you can play it without that. There's actually a funny story about the Dance the Night Away thing. We learned it like, you know, that day. I charted it out in my hotel room, and we're at sound check, and I used to have a tom, you know, a drum right to my left, and I just taped it to that so that I could kind of glance at it and look at it, you know. And I left it there during the gig, and Dave saw it. He was not happy about it. He's like, "What are you doing with that chart?" And I was like, "I just didn't want to make a mistake, man. I didn't want to screw up your song." And but anyway, you know, it was fine. I think he was just giving me a hard time, but it was, you know, that's just how I go about it. I probably still have a lot of those charts in like envelopes. I save them all in case I ever need to use them anymore. Now I have, I write them out and I scan them and I put them on, I have an iPad with a music, you know, like a music thing. I forget what it's called. Anyway, it's one of these things where you can put charts in your iPad. And so for the CCR gig, when I got asked to do that gig, I had like 2 days to learn the songs and go do the gig. Like there was no rehearsals. It was just go over some stuff at sound check and go, you know, play the gig. So I had to have the charts. There was not enough time for me to like remember 20 songs with all the little, you know, things that are in those songs. So I put them on this iPad. And the cool thing about the iPad is when the stage goes dark, the iPad is still lit. So I can still see what I need to see. And all I have to do is hit one side, you know, you just touch one side of the screen and it will advance to the next song. So I just put them in the order of the set list and I could just hit, you know, go through them. So I was reading the gig, basically trying to look as much as possible like I wasn't reading it, but I had to because it was such last minute, you know.
It sounds like, I mean, you have to be incredibly versatile. I mean, what really impressed me is that here, you know, it's probably a Tuesday you're playing with a storm, and Wednesday you get a call from Greg Bissonette, and the next day you're thrown deep into the fire with songs that you probably hadn't even, outside the Van Halen stuff, that you probably hadn't even heard before. I mean, I don't even think the record I don't even think was out in early '94. I think it came out sometime like in, I want to say April or May. I just remember it being a very rainy spring day when I lived in Albany, New York, and I cracked that open.
Yeah, I don't remember the release date, but yeah, I had never heard any of that stuff before, you know, from that record before we played it. I actually saw Nile Rodgers not too long ago. He played in Omaha, and I went there. He was opening for Cher, in fact.
No kidding.
And I know that, so Richard Hilton is one of his keyboard players, and he's worked with Nile since probably the 80s, I guess. And Richard actually came and played some shows with us with Dave. And that's where I met Richard. So I saw Richard at the gig, and then I saw Nile. And I said, "Hey, by the way, I played on that stuff with you, or that you produced." And then, you know, and he said, and he goes, "Oh, you played Big Train."
Well, Nile, of course, produced Your Filthy Little Mouth, and Richard Hilton played keyboards on a couple of tracks.
Right, and Nile was at the Capitol Studios thing that I told you about, where Nightlife came out of, or that, you know, that limited edition thing. So I did meet him during that, but I had never heard the songs before I got in the band. So yeah, you know, I mean, that's the whole like versatility thing. You know, when I was growing up, learning how to play, I wound up having to do a lot of different styles of music, you know, and that's true for guys like Greg Bissonette and Steve Smith. You know, they're all, Greg and Steve are great jazz players, and I've played a lot of jazz too, but I'm not on their level with that stuff. But you know, it's one of the I guess benefits of having done some of that stuff is that it allows you to be able to transition between different styles of music maybe a little bit more easily if you've been exposed to some of that stuff, as long as you can do it without you know, like, don't bring your jazz thing to the rock gig, you know what I mean? Like, and
Right.
vice versa. You know, you kind of have to stay in the music that you're playing, whether, you know, even if it's not like your favorite music, you have to do what, you know, serve the music, do what the music calls for. And so some people, if their thing is like that they're a jazz guy, they have a difficult time transitioning to playing like rock or pop because they want to do their jazz thing in the context of those songs, and it doesn't always work, you know. So that was something that I remember talking to guys like Greg and other people like that, you know, about that type of thing, and, you know, being able to kind of transition between that stuff and you know, try to be, you know, versatile, but still, you know, keep the focus where it needs to be. And the versatility thing, quite honestly, has been one of the reasons why I've been able to work. You know, it's because not every gig is the same, but if you can kind of, you know, do what you need to do for each gig, there's more opportunities. And being able to read, it also helps too, because if you're ever asked to do something that requires it, you can. But if you can't read, then you're automatically not available for that gig, you know.
That makes sense to me. So you left Dave's band and then Foreigner happened, or they somehow paired into each other?
So Dave's tour ended, right? It ended in, I think it was like the first week of October, maybe, of that year. And so then I was just kind of hanging around, and a guy that I had gone to college with, I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston for 2 semesters. A friend of mine, Tom Gimbel, was playing with Foreigner. And actually, he was going back at that time, he was going back and forth between Foreigner and Aerosmith. He plays keyboards and sax and guitar and sings. So he's kind of like, similar to like Brett Tuggle. He's very, you know, kind of like the utility guy. He can cover a lot of different parts, you know.
Yeah.
And really good at all of those things. And Tom still plays the Foreigner, actually. So he recommended me, and I knew Mark Schulman, who had been playing with Foreigner, and he was leaving to join Simple Minds. And I remember the Foreigner guys were very upset about that at the time. They had him erased from the cover of the record, the Mr. Moonlight record, on some of the copies of it. But anyway, they since, you know, made up. But and then he's gone on to play with Cher, and, you know, we've done a lot of the same gigs, me and Mark. But anyway, yeah. So Tom recommended me, and I'm trying to think of if there was anybody else. But so I wound up flying to New York to audition for Foreigner.
Mm-hmm.
There's another, you know, thing where they had like, I don't know how many guys, 40 guys or whatever it was. And they asked me to do the gig. And the funny thing was they had the same management as Dave.
No kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. So they had, it was called Hard to Handle Management, Steve Barnett and Stuart Young. They also managed AC/DC, I think, at the time. But anyway, so I already knew the managers, you know, from having been in Dave's band. So there you go.
Wow. And the career keeps going. You mentioned before, I'm sure Steve and I might have another Dave or question or two that comes to mind, but you said that you have a project with your girlfriend that you've been working on as of late?
Yeah, it's actually been going on for a while. My girlfriend's name is Marcy Requist, Requist, and her website is marcyrequist.com. Mm-hmm. And she, you know, had never really made a record, but she's always loved music and she loves to sing. Mm-hmm. And she went through some tough times, and so did I. I had a divorce and all kinds of crazy stuff. And, we were messing around in the studio, and the music is completely different than any of the rock stuff that I've done. It's the first record we did was called Covers of Comfort. And the idea behind the record was, comforting music. It's mostly ballads, so a lot of covers. We did a version of Hallelujah and Make You Feel My Love, which is a Bob Dylan song, and a bunch of stuff like that. And it's basically for, kind of music for people who might be going through some rough times or whatever. And then we did a couple of Christmas songs, and, it's a whole other style and a whole other type of thing than any of the stuff I did with Dave or Foreigner or any of that stuff. It's not a rock. In fact, some of the songs don't even have drums on it, just percussion, or there's a couple that are just her and a piano, and it's really cool. I really like it. And Matt, like I said, Matt Bissonette is playing on it, and my good friend Kurt Griffey played guitar on it, and Kurt and I played with CCR and Greg Raleigh together. And we played in an all-star band with Randy Meisner from the Eagles, and Spencer Davis and Denny Lane from Wings. So that's where I met Kurt. And then the keyboard player is a Grammy-nominated guy, Wally Minko, who's played with everybody from John Anderson.
Yeah, he's in the Bissonette Brothers band at the moment, the Redcoats.
The Redcoats, that's right, yeah. Wally is a close friend. We have known him since the 80s. He's played with everybody from Jean-Luc Ponty to Pink to Tony Braxton to Arturo Sandoval, and just a ton of guys. He's a brilliant piano player. And so that's the core band. The sax player is a guy named Tom Evans, who he's on a couple songs. He currently plays with the Eagles, actually, and he's done stuff with Carly Simon and Carole King and Rod Stewart, U2, all kinds of people. So it's a great bunch of musicians, and Marcy sings like an angel, and it's fun stuff. And you guys should check it out. Tell everybody to check it out.
You were just talking about Kurt, who you played with in CCR, who I saw a couple of times in the last 3 years or so of touring. Kurt looks like he should have been in the David Lee Roth band. He would have been, looks like it. He plays like it.
He would have been great in the band. In fact, the way that I met Kurt, the way that I met Marcy was because her and Kurt grew up together. They've known each other since 5th grade. And so I've heard all the stories about when they were in high school, and, Van Halen was the thing, and so he knows all that Eddie stuff. He could have done the Greg or the Dave gig very easily. And he was great in the Greg Raleigh band. You should hear him on the Rain Dance CD, the live CD. He's great on that. And he's on some of the songs on the new one, Sonic Ranch. Kurt's on a few of those songs.
Man, talent and serendipity has paid off for you immensely. That's for sure. Just the connections and, how you've met these people. And of course, I mean, clearly it's incredible talent. I mean, that versatility just always impresses me as basically a very non-musician who doesn't get out past his basement. I mean, it's just, I love hearing the behind the scenes stuff for any artist. Of course, particularly for Dave, because this podcast, which totally behind the scenes, which surprised me, is that you guys all shared a bus, which I'm not sure if that's either the most coolest thing ever or the most aggravating thing at some point, or maybe some points in between during the tour.
Well, when you're on a tour, you spend a lot of time with people. So if there's stress or whatever, it can get a little weird. But most of the time, as long as you're with guys that you can get along with pretty well, then it's great, And I have to say, knock on wood, most of the stuff that I've done, that's how it's been. It's difficult to stay in a band on the road if you're a jerk, because people don't want to be around it. And unless you're the principal and it's your gig, you're going to get fired if you rattle too many feathers or whatever, And so most people figure out, how to get along reasonably well. And really, for the most part, I've gotten along been very fortunate. Everybody I've worked with, for the most part, has been pretty cool to work with.
No
But
doubt,
one of
you
the
got to
things
be
with
able.
Greg's band was our whole thing was, if you're a jerk, you're fired, because we're not out here to not have a good time,
Right. Well, I mean, when you're out on a full tour, you're spending more time with those 4, 5, 6 guys in the band than you are anyone else, your entire family.
Yeah.
I mean, so I look at bands as just being these enclosed little sociological experiments, because
Well,
you
the
learn
gigs are the
people skills
smallest-
fast if you don't know them.
Yeah, the gigs are the smallest part of the tour. You're only on stage for, an hour and a half, 2 hours a night. The whole rest of it is hanging around and schlepping to the airport or getting on a bus or getting on a plane or whatever. It's not, you really get paid for that stuff. The gigs are free.
I was just going to bring that up. I've heard numerous musicians say that exact same thing, that you're getting paid to travel, and the 2 hours a night is free and the funnest part, of course.
Yeah, that's obviously. I mean, look, I'm not complaining one bit. I've gotten to see the entire world, and I've gotten paid to do it, and I cannot complain about my life. I've been very lucky. I know a lot of people who wish they'd had those opportunities, and I'm very, very grateful and thankful for all of that. Regardless of whatever ups and downs or trials and tribulations there may have been during some of those things, it's been fantastic. I mean, what would I complain about? Other than I didn't make zillions of dollars. I guess that's the only thing.
I have a stupid Dave question that's going to be sound a little fanboyish. And the David Lee Roth that we know in 2020, he speaks like 5 languages and martial arts, and he's shredded, and he knows all this calligraphy and his drawing. Like, he does everything well, and he's practicing skills all day long. In 1994, what is David Lee Roth doing on the tour bus? Is he like watching baseball? And
No, I don't think he watched baseball. Well, I mean, some of it I really can't repeat, probably.
Okay.
Dave is a very interesting guy. He's maybe one of the most unique individuals I've ever met. And, he's very smart, obviously, but he can kind of go off in a million different directions, and it's hard to know which one it's going to be, and yeah, very talented, obviously. The whole martial arts thing, I know he's been doing that since he was young. That's where all those kicks and all that stuff come from. And, I think, look, this is total speculation on my part, because I haven't talked to Dave in 26 years, whatever it's been, since I toured with him. So I don't know any of the intimate details of his life, but from what I saw when I was around, his world is kind of like just like his world. He's not married. He doesn't have an immediate family. He has, his sister used to come out with us occasionally, and I don't know whether he really has a lot of close friends. I know he's got like his entourage and stuff like that.
Right.
But on a just like how you or I might think of our buddies go visit our friends and go have dinner or something like that. I don't know that Dave does that or not. I really don't know, but he's got a lot of time and he's got money. So, he doesn't have to scrap around for, to make sure his mortgage is paid. He can sit around and figure out calligraphy or speak languages or whatever, because he's got the time and the means. So, good for him. Congratulations, Dave.
That's the answer I was basically anticipating, looking for. But I thought there was going to be, and you know what? He never misses a Notre Dame game on a Saturday, because you hear things like that, like Kerry King from Slayer. I'd heard from like a friend of a friend that Slayer would not tour during the NFL season because Kerry King did not want to miss any games. And you go,
Really?
I don't know if the NFL and Slayer go hand in hand, but okay.
Well, a lot of people, I'm a big sports fan too. It doesn't mean I'm not going to tour during sports season. And like I say, a lot of guys, I played a lot of sports growing up, so I really enjoyed those softball games. And, guys like Dave Isley, like I was telling you, he was a minor league ball player, and he's also a martial arts guy. I think he's a black belt too, so he's always, people have other interests besides just the music. Music is great. Music is great, but, there are some guys who really, that's all they do, and their abilities show as a result because they're so good, the focus is really, honed in.
Yeah, I would bet you Steve Lukather has a guitar in his hand right now, if I were betting that.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. Neil Sean is like that too. Every time I've been around Neil, he's always had a guitar in his hands. Except at the NAMM show where you have to walk around, but
Steve, anything you want to add? Because I took that into weirdo territory.
Oh, that's all right.
This was a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, you're once again, ronwikso.com, WIKSO.com, the discography, an incredible biography on there, everything you're doing now. I just, the amount of people you've played with in the studio or live, I mean, we're talking high up in the double digits, if not triple digits. It's amazing and fascinating to me.
Yeah, I don't think my website is even up to date, but thank you. In fact, I know it's not up to date because I've been meaning to update it for years and I never get around to it. One of these days I will. But yeah, I've been very lucky, like I say, of course, there's a lot of other guys who've done way more than I have, Greg Bissonette being one of them. Greg's unbelievable, he's worked with just everybody on earth.
Pat Boone included.
Huh?
Pat Boone included.
Pat Boone included, yeah, and Ringo, and he's just done amazing stuff, and good for him. He's a great drummer. He deserves it,
Totally, Ron. I can't thank you enough for your time, man. And wow, looking forward to seeing what's coming next from you because it sounds like you're not sitting there idly during COVID-19.
Oh, we're trying to keep things going. Speaking of other interests, I've gotten deep into trading stock options and futures too. So
I've seen that on your Twitter feed.
Oh, have you? Yeah.
Yeah, you've got a few things on there, and I'm like, wow, okay, this is pretty deep stuff here.
If you want to make a lot of money, follow Ophir Gottlieb on Twitter. That guy is genius.
I may or may not be writing news for a financial website. I may or may not be. I cannot say, I cannot deny, but I feel you on the stock market.
Yeah, man. If you can learn about that stuff, it can be very intense. And I do a lot of studying about it, and I find it really interesting. But it's, there's a lot of opportunity there too. And this year, shockingly, with the COVID thing, it's been an amazing opportunity. If you would have looked at the markets in March, you would have thought, oh my God, the world's about to end and nobody's, all the stocks are going to go to zero or whatever. And then it turned out to be unbelievable. So.
Yeah, March, I was pulling my hair out, and it took an amazing amount of willpower on my part not to look at any of my 401k or any of that stuff. And I successfully never looked at anything until the end of the year. Well, just literally a month or two ago, I was like, I mean, I pay attention to what's going on in the world and the news out there, but just purposely did not look at anything. I'm like, whoa, this is okay. I didn't see this coming back in March when I thought the sky was falling. Well, on the stock market, at least.
I think it's good to be. I know most people don't want to get into the weeds on all this stuff, so they're what you would call like a passive investor, right? You just put money into an index fund or something like that, and just let it go or whatever, dollar cost average, and that's great. That can work fantastic. But Warren Buffett, he had a really good bit of advice, which is to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. So if you were greedy in March, you did really well.
Got it.
Because everybody was fearful.
This has been one of the more impressive episodes. I got to tell you, first off, a musician with incredible financial acumen, I know is got to be a rare thing. And it's definitely, I think, the first episode we've done with three primarily native Long Islanders, all growing up within a few exits of each other, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Darren, where are you from?
I'm from Belmore, but I live in Long Beach.
That's where you are now?
That's where I am now. Joan Jett is on this block.
Oh, nice. I grew up, or didn't grow up, but I one of my other friends from Berkeley College of Music was from Long Beach, Bobby Maxton, and
Okay.
his dad was a judge there, Judge Maxton. This is back in the 70s and 80s.
This town also gave the world Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater, but he doesn't like to talk about it.
He's an amazing drummer too.
For sure. This town has had a big impact on a lot of things. The Godfather is supposed to take place here, but they filmed it in Staten Island and said it was Long Beach, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Ron, we're sending people to your website. They're checking out the music. Anything to add? Anything we may have missed?
No, I mean, I appreciate you guys even wanting to talk to me, and I hope I didn't insult anybody.
The opposite, man. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Steve.
Hey, thanks, Ron. Happy holidays.
Same to you. Merry Christmas, you guys.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Take care.
All right. We'll see you soon.
Paltrocast.